HOA, Karen locked my disabled daughter in a cage just to teach her some manners. It was a morning like any other in the sleepy suburban neighborhood, the kind where the sound of birds chirping and the soft hum of lawnmowers is a familiar lull. The air was cool, a light breeze swaying the branches of the trees, and the houses sat like silent sentinels along the tree-lined streets, each one a picture of serenity. For a brief moment, it felt like the world was in perfect balance, as if everything was where it was meant to be. I was just beginning my day, a cup of coffee in hand, the soft glow of the kitchen light casting long shadows across the floor. My daughter, Emma, was still asleep in her room, her breathing steady and calm. She always struggled with mornings, her disability making it hard for her to keep a routine like other children. But this morning was different. There was a strange sense of unease, a feeling that something wasn't quite right, though I couldn't pinpoint it yet. I moved through the motions, sipping my coffee, checking the time, preparing for the day ahead, until I heard the shrill sound of my neighbor's voice. Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of neighborhood rules, was shouting. It wasn't uncommon for her to raise her voice at the neighborhood kids for not mowing their lawns to her liking. But this time, there was something darker in her tone. My heart skipped a beat, and I set down my cup, my instincts kicking in. I opened the window, just in time to see Karen standing in front of her house, a look of satisfaction on her face. But what I saw next turned my stomach, and time seemed to freeze in that moment. There, in her front yard, was my daughter Emma caged. She was in a small metal cage, a cage meant for a dog, not for a child. Her fragile body slumped against the cold bars, her face twisted in confusion and fear, her hands reaching out for freedom that wasn't there. My breath caught in my throat. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. The neighborhood was silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I rushed outside, panic flooding my veins. As I neared Karen's house, I could feel my pulse in my ears, the blood rushing as my mind screamed for answers. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a loud reminder of the helplessness I was beginning to feel. Karen was standing there, her arms crossed over her chest, looking down at my daughter with an expression that was cold and detached. She didn't seem worried. She didn't seem afraid. She was calm, eerily calm, as if what she had done was completely justified. "She needs to learn some manners," Karen said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. Her eyes flicked over to me, a glint of satisfaction in her gaze. "I'm just teaching her a lesson." A lesson? My mind screamed. What kind of lesson was this? I couldn't comprehend the cruelty, the audacity of it all. My daughter, who had fought so hard every single day of her life just to have a semblance of normalcy, was now locked in a cage. And Karen, the woman who had always prided herself on being the good neighbor, was the one responsible for this twisted act. Emma was still trapped, her body weak and trembling, her face pale. She had always been sensitive to loud sounds, to sudden changes in her environment, and now she was trapped in a cage, subjected to the one thing that could crush her spirit, rejection. Her disability had always made her different, but she had never deserved to be treated like this. She deserved love, understanding, and compassion, not this humiliation. My mind raced as I approached Karen, my words struggling to break free from the rising knot in my throat. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of the horror I felt. "Open that cage now, Karen. You have no right." But Karen merely shrugged, her face a mask of indifference. "It's for her own good. She needs to learn discipline. She's not like the other kids. She needs to know that actions have consequences." I could barely breathe as the words echoed in my mind. Discipline? Consequences? My daughter was not some misbehaving child to be punished for things beyond her control. This wasn't about manners, this was about power. Karen had crossed a line, and in doing so, she had exposed herself as something much darker than the neighborhood busybody she had always appeared to be. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Neighbors were beginning to gather, their faces twisted in confusion and disbelief. Some stood in silence, unsure of what to do, while others whispered among themselves. But no one moved to help. No one stepped forward to stop this madness. The neighborhood that I had once called a safe haven was now a battleground, a place where the line between right and wrong was blurred by one person's twisted sense of authority. I turned back to my daughter, my heart shattering at the sight of her, still caged, still frightened. Her eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment I saw the trust she had in me, the belief that I would make things right. But as I reached for the cage, I realized how much was at stake now. This wasn't just a fight for Emma's freedom, it was a fight for justice, for control, and for the very principles that define what kind of community we were. The shock of the moment gave way to a flood of emotions: rage, fear, disbelief. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let Karen's actions stand. Not while my daughter was still suffering, not while the world watched in silence. Karen had underestimated me, and she had underestimated the strength of a parent's love. This would not be the end of the story, it was just the beginning. And as I faced Karen, I knew that I was about to fight a battle far bigger than any neighborhood dispute. This was about the values that held us all together, and I wasn't going to let her take them away. Not without a fight. The stakes were now higher than ever. And as I prepared to face Karen, I couldn't help but wonder: would this community stand by me, or would it let her reign supreme, her sense of power unchecked and unchallenged? The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was for sure: I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The situation with Karen and my daughter Emma was not a one-time event, but the culmination of a series of smaller, simmering conflicts that had been brewing under the surface for years. To understand how we got here, I need to first paint a clearer picture of the key characters involved, the ones who shaped this shocking incident, the ones who would never be the same after it, and the ones who remained silent as the world around them changed. Karen, the self-righteous enforcer Karen, was not a stranger to anyone in our neighborhood. In fact, she was a fixture, an ever-present figure who took it upon herself to uphold the rules of our community. On the surface, she seemed like the kind of person you could rely on: polite, well-spoken, and always quick to offer unsolicited advice. But beneath that facade was a woman who believed in control above all else, someone who thrived on authority and domination, even if it meant crossing boundaries that no one else dared to breach. Her obsession with discipline and order was something she'd honed over the years, gaining influence and respect in the community for being the no-nonsense neighbor. She was the one who would organize the neighborhood cleanups, enforce parking regulations, and ensure that everyone followed the rules to the letter. But what many people didn't realize was that her adherence to these rules was not born out of a sense of duty, but out of a deep-seated need to feel superior. To her, there was no gray area. Everything was either black or white, right or wrong, and those who didn't conform to her standards were in wrong. It wasn't always obvious at first. For the longest time, I had thought of Karen as just a minor annoyance. Yes, she would often give unsolicited advice on how to maintain our lawn or scold our children for minor infractions, but I never imagined she would be capable of something like this. That was until the day Emma became the target of her misguided sense of authority. Karen's actions toward Emma that day were more than just a moment of cruelty. They were a manifestation of a deeply ingrained belief system, a warped sense of right and wrong. To her, she was simply helping Emma, teaching her a lesson in discipline, but what she failed to realize was that Emma was not like the other children. Emma was disabled, and her limitations were not something that could be overcome through punishment or force. No amount of discipline would change that. But Karen, blinded by her need for control, failed to understand that. To her, Emma's disability was just another excuse for bad behavior. Emma, the heart of the story in stark contrast to Karen's rigid, controlling nature, my daughter Emma was pure innocence. At 10 years old, Emma had already faced more challenges than most children would encounter in a lifetime. Born with a condition that affected her ability to walk and speak, Emma had always been different. But that difference was not something she felt sorry for herself about. Instead, it became a part of her identity, one that she carried with grace, determination, and a strength far beyond her years. From the moment she was born, we knew Emma would have to fight harder than most children for the things that others took for granted. Walking, talking, even holding a pencil all required painstaking effort. But Emma was never one to shy away from a challenge. She worked tirelessly every day to improve, constantly pushing herself with the help of her family and therapists. It was a long, hard road, but we were always by her side, helping her navigate the world that wasn't built for people like her. Despite her disability, Emma was a vibrant, bright child with an infectious laugh and an unshakable spirit. She loved reading, drawing, and playing with her friends. Her disability did not define her, but the world often saw it as the first thing about her. And that was the tragedy of it all. People like Karen couldn't see past the surface, couldn't see the beautiful, intelligent child beneath the disability. To them, Emma was just another problem, something that needed to be fixed, disciplined, or contained. I knew Emma's spirit. I knew how hard she fought to be treated like everyone else. But in Karen's eyes, Emma wasn't a child who deserved empathy. She was just a misbehaving kid who needed to be taught a lesson. The day Karen locked her in the cage wasn't just a violation of Emma's rights, it was an attack on her very essence. It was an attempt to break her spirit, to show her that her difference was something that had to be punished. As for me, I was just a father trying to raise my daughter in a world that often failed to understand her. Every day, I navigated the complexities of parenting a child with special needs, juggling medical appointments, therapy sessions, and the constant emotional toll that came with seeing Emma struggle in a world that wasn't designed for her. But there was also a deep love that anchored me, a love that gave me the strength to face each day with hope, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Emma was my world, and I would do anything to protect her. The bond we shared was unlike anything else. I was her protector, her advocate, and her greatest cheerleader. I would fight for her no matter the cost. Karen's actions, however, took me by surprise. I had always known that there would be people who would judge Emma, who would make her feel small, who would see her as a problem rather than a person. But I never imagined that one of those people would be someone who lived so close to us, someone who we had once trusted, someone who should have known better. The weight of the situation was crushing. My heart ached as I watched Emma in the cage, her small body trembling, her eyes wide with fear. But even in that moment, I knew that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let Karen think that her actions were acceptable. Emma deserved better than this. She deserved to be seen for who she was, not for what she couldn't do. And as a father, I was determined to make sure that Karen and the world understood that. The neighbors, silent witnesses as the situation unfolded, the rest of the neighborhood remained largely silent. Some watched from their windows, others gathered in small groups on the sidewalks, but few dared to speak up. The silence was deafening, and it weighed heavily on me. It was as if Karen's actions had somehow been accepted, as if no one dared to challenge her authority. But there were whispers, too. Some of the neighbors came to me afterward, expressing their shock and regret that they hadn't done more. But their apologies felt hollow in the face of what had happened. No one had stepped forward when it mattered. No one had raised their voice when Emma needed them most. In a way, the neighbors represented the apathy that often exists in communities. People were willing to stand by, to watch, but few were willing to get involved. It was a harsh lesson, one that made me realize that sometimes the fight for justice is not just against the villain, but also against the silence of the bystanders who allow that villain to thrive. The setting, a community divided our neighborhood, once a place of warmth and togetherness, had become a battleground. What had once been a safe, welcoming place for families was now a divided community, split between those who supported Karen's twisted sense of discipline and those who were too afraid to speak up. The divide was not just ideological, it was deeply personal. It was about power, control, and the belief that some people's voices mattered more than others. I knew that the only way to get through this was to fight for my daughter, to fight for what was right, and to fight for the kind of community I wanted Emma to grow up in. a community where differences were accepted, not punished. But that fight I knew would not be easy, and it was only just beginning. In the days that followed, I would learn just how far I was willing to go for my daughter, and just how much I could change in the face of an overwhelming force like Karen. But first, I had to face the reality that this wasn't just a fight for my family, it was a fight for the very soul of our community. The days following the incident were filled with chaos, disbelief, and an ever growing sense of urgency. What had started as an isolated act of cruelty now felt like the opening salvo in a much larger battle. The shock of seeing my daughter caged by Karen's twisted sense of discipline had triggered something deep within me, a need to protect Emma at all costs, and, ultimately, a desire to confront the injustice head on. But as much as I wanted to act swiftly and decisively, the situation was far more complex than I could have ever imagined. The first step, reaching out for help, the first course of action was clear. I needed to get Emma out of that cage, and I needed to do it immediately. But the reality was far less simple. Karen was not just a neighbor. She was a well-established figure in our community, someone who had ingrained herself into the fabric of the neighborhood with her relentless pursuit of order. Her actions had already garnered a certain level of support from people who believed in the power of discipline, no matter the cost. And in that moment, I realized just how isolated Emma and I had become. I reached out to a few trusted friends and family members, hoping they could help me navigate the emotional and legal hurdles that lay ahead. But as I started to explain what had happened, I was met with disbelief. Some questioned whether the situation had been blown out of proportion, while others tried to downplay Karen's actions, claiming that she meant well. It was difficult to accept, but this was a recurring theme. People wanted to believe that things weren't as bad as they seemed, or they simply didn't want to get involved. I made calls to the local authorities, hoping for swift action, but I quickly learned that the legal system wasn't prepared to respond to something as nuanced as this. The police, while sympathetic, couldn't intervene unless there was clear physical harm or a direct threat. Unfortunately, Karen's actions, locking Emma in a cage, didn't meet the criteria for immediate arrest or intervention. It was, in their eyes, a matter for the community to resolve. I couldn't afford to wait for bureaucracy to take its time. Time was a luxury Emma didn't have. The community divided, allies and adversaries. As I processed the situation, I realized that this wasn't just an issue between Karen and my family, it was a community issue. The entire neighborhood had witnessed what had happened, and now everyone had to choose a side. But as with most things, the lines weren't clearly drawn. Some neighbors began to rally behind me. These were the people who saw Emma not as a problem to be corrected, but as a child who deserved respect and compassion. They, too, were appalled by Karen's actions and wanted to see justice done. There was Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who had known Emma since she was a baby and always took the time to talk to her, no matter how difficult it was for Emma to respond. Then there was Mark, a father of 2 young children, who saw the inherent cruelty in what Karen had done and wanted to make sure it didn't happen again. But just as many neighbors turned their backs on me, they were either intimidated by Karen's influence or simply didn't want to get involved. These were the people who made excuses for her behavior, citing tradition or rules as justification for her overreach. They were the ones who saw me as the troublemaker, the one who was making a scene out of nothing. It was a harsh reality. The neighborhood I had once thought of as home was now divided, with some people willing to stand up for what was right, and others too comfortable with the status quo to take action. In the days that followed, the emotional toll was immense. Emma struggled to process what had happened. Though she was slowly coming out of the trauma of being locked away, she was still grappling with the emotional scars that would take much longer to heal. I tried my best to comfort her, to explain that this wasn't her fault, but the uncertainty in her eyes was something I couldn't erase. I wished I could take away her fear, her confusion, but it was clear that the damage had been done, not just to her body but to her soul. The fight for justice. Taking a stand despite the growing support from some neighbors, I knew that I had to take action to hold Karen accountable. I couldn't let her get away with what she had done. I started gathering evidence, photographs of the cage, testimonies from the few neighbors who had witnessed the event, and recordings of my conversations with local authorities. But I quickly realized that even with this evidence, taking legal action would be an uphill battle. The system was designed to protect individuals, but it seemed woefully unprepared for situations like this, where the perpetrator was someone well connected in the community. I turned to social media, hoping to raise awareness and garner public support. I posted the story of what had happened, sharing the pictures of Emma in the cage, and explaining how Karen's actions had shattered our sense of safety and security. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People were horrified by what had transpired, and soon messages of support began flooding in. Local activists and even some public figures shared the post, adding weight to the message. It wasn't just a personal issue anymore, it was a societal one. A fight for basic human dignity, for the right of disabled children to live without fear of being dehumanized. But even as the online support grew, the conflict with Karen only intensified. She began to rally her supporters, attempting to justify her actions. She claimed that she had acted out of concern for Emma's well-being, arguing that her form of discipline was necessary for children with disabilities to learn how to behave. Her supporters echoed her sentiment, accusing me of overreacting, claiming I was exaggerating the situation for personal gain. It was a classic case of victim blaming, and it only made me more determined to continue fighting for what was right. The tension builds, the call for a showdown as the days wore on. The tension in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. The HOA board, a group that Karen had long held sway over, convened to discuss the situation. They invited me to attend the meeting, a gesture that seemed like an attempt at diplomacy, but it quickly became apparent that this would not be a fair hearing. Karen had already secured the backing of several influential members of the HOA, and the deck was stacked against me. But I wasn't going to back down. I went to the meeting prepared, armed with evidence, testimonies, and a determination to hold Karen accountable. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about standing up to a system that had allowed people like Karen to wield power over others without consequence. It was about showing the community that silence in the face of injustice was no longer an option. The meeting was heated. I could feel the eyes of the board members on me, their judgmental stares weighing heavily on my every word. But I stood my ground, speaking passionately about the trauma Karen had inflicted on my daughter and the lasting impact her actions had on our family. I called for Karen to be removed from the HOA, to face the consequences of her behavior. The room was tense, and for the first time, I saw cracks in Karen's facade. She was no longer the calm, confident figure who had locked my daughter away in a cage. Now, she was defensive, visibly shaken by the public scrutiny. But she wasn't ready to give up her position of power just yet. She fought back, her words sharp and biting, trying to paint me as the aggressor. She even went as far as to accuse me of being unfit to raise Emma. The meeting ended with no immediate resolution, but the battle lines had been drawn. I had taken the first step in confronting the system, but the war was far from over. As I left the meeting, my heart was heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The fight for justice had just begun, and I was ready to face whatever came next, because I knew that if I didn't fight for Emma, no one else would. The moment of reckoning had arrived. It was a chilly evening when the final confrontation took place, and the weight of everything that had happened, the locked cage, the isolation, the emotional toll on my daughter, seemed to hang in the air like a storm waiting to break. I had done everything I could to make my case known, but Karen and her supporters were not ready to let go of the power they had held for so long. The HOA board was still divided, the community was still uncertain, and I was left feeling as though I was fighting an uphill battle with no end in sight. But that evening, everything changed. The time had come to take matters into my own hands, to confront Karen head-on, and to make her see the consequences of her actions. The meeting, tensions reach a boiling point. It started with a heated meeting, the atmosphere thick with tension. Karen had once again called for a neighborhood gathering to discuss the incident, but it was clear that she wasn't interested in finding any common ground. Her supporters had shown up in full force, each one ready to defend her actions, but I wasn't about to let them hide behind their excuses any longer. This wasn't just about me or Emma anymore. This was about the kind of community we wanted to build, the kind of society we wanted to live in, a place where power wasn't wielded by those who sought to control others, where a child's vulnerability wasn't exploited by those in positions of authority. I walked into that room with my head held high, armed with evidence, a clear vision of what needed to happen, and a determination that burned brighter than ever. I wasn't just a father, I was a force to be reckoned with. The emotion of the past few days had transformed me. I had witnessed my daughter's suffering, her confusion, her fear. And now I was ready to make sure it never happened again. The HOA meeting began with the usual pleasantries, but it didn't take long for things to spiral into chaos. Karen took the floor first, her voice as steady and authoritative as ever. She spoke of discipline, of respect for the rules, of teaching Emma a lesson she would never forget. She painted herself as the hero of the story, as someone who had done what was necessary to help a child who clearly wasn't like the others. I stood up and the room fell silent. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, waiting to see what I would say. The moment had come. I've listened to all of you. I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I've listened to Karen, I've listened to the excuses, and I've heard the justifications. But I cannot remain silent anymore. What Karen did to my daughter was not discipline. It was abuse, and it is something that should never, ever be tolerated in this community. I paused, letting the words sink in. The room was dead quiet. Even Karen seemed to hesitate, though her face remained a mask of defiance. Emma, I continued, is a child with a disability. She doesn't deserve to be punished for something she can't control. She doesn't deserve to be locked in a cage. You see, this isn't just about a simple mistake or a misunderstanding. This is about power. This is about Karen thinking she has the right to control and punish anyone she deems unworthy of her approval. But that stops now. I won't allow it. Karen's eyes narrowed, and I could see the defensive posture she had adopted in the past few days was starting to crack. She stood up, ready to counter my words, but I wasn't finished. I'm not here to fight for me, I said, my voice rising. I'm here to fight for my daughter, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure that no other child, no other family has to go through what we've been through. The room erupted. Some neighbors began to clap, others stood in silent shock. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Karen, however, was not so easily cowed. She stood at the front of the room, her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a tight line. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice cutting through the noise. You have no right to accuse me of anything. I was just trying to teach your daughter some manners. She was misbehaving, and I was trying to help. It was then that I saw it, her arrogance, her inability to comprehend the harm she had caused. She truly believed that what she had done was right, that her actions were justified. But I could see through the facade. This wasn't about helping anyone. This was about her need to feel powerful, to feel in control. And that was something I couldn't allow to stand. I took a deep breath and then addressed the room. Karen's actions have consequences, I said, my voice calm but firm. And it's time for all of us to recognize that. It's not just about what happened to my daughter. It's about what happens when we let people like Karen dictate the rules, when we allow them to use their position for personal gain. This is a community, and in a community we stand up for each other. We protect the vulnerable, and we hold each other accountable. The silence in the room was deafening. Karen's supporters, those who had been so vocal in her defense, were now starting to question her. Some of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others remained quiet, unsure of how to react. The showdown, exposing the truth, the real turning point came when I brought out the final piece of evidence, photographs of the cage, the bruises Emma had suffered from being locked in that confined space, and the testimonies from the neighbors who had witnessed the entire incident. It was irrefutable. Karen could no longer deny what she had done. Karen, this isn't just a matter of discipline, I said, pointing to the photographs. This is a matter of humanity. You locked my daughter in a cage, you humiliated her, and you shattered her trust in the world around her. And you did it because you believed you had the right to do so. Karen's face turned red with anger, but her defenses were starting to crumble. She sputtered, unable to form a coherent rebuttal. She had expected to be the one in control, to be the one who dictated the terms. But she was out of her depth now. As the confrontation continued, I realized that this wasn't just about Karen. It was about all of us, about how far we were willing to go to protect our community, our children, and the values that defined us. I knew that this moment would define not just my family's future, but the future of everyone in the neighborhood. The consequences: a change in the air by the end of the meeting. Karen had been stripped of her position in the HOA, and the community had begun to take a stand against the abuse of power that had been allowed to flourish for so long. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and the scars from the incident would linger for some time, but it was a victory for justice, for compassion, and for Emma. As I left the meeting that night, Emma by my side, I knew that we had taken the first steps toward healing. The battle had been long and hard, but in the end, we had won. And though the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, we were stronger than ever, united in our determination to never let something like this happen again. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of hope in Emma's eyes, a hope that told me, no matter what came next, we would face it together. The battle was over, but the aftermath still loomed large. The feeling of relief that had washed over me in the aftermath of Karen's ousting was fleeting, soon replaced by a strange mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. The fight for justice had been hard won, but the emotional toll it had taken on me and my daughter was profound, and the consequences of Karen's actions would echo through our lives for some time to come. The immediate aftermath. Emotional recovery. As I walked out of the HOA meeting, Emma clutched my hand tightly, her small fingers trembling slightly. The evening air felt cool against my skin, but I could feel the heat of the confrontation still radiating through my body. My mind replayed every word, every gesture, every moment of that intense exchange. But it wasn't just the adrenaline of the confrontation that I was grappling with. It was the realization of how deeply this experience had affected my daughter. We hadn't spoken much since the meeting. Emma, always perceptive, had been quiet, her face a mask of uncertainty. She had been through so much already, and now this. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the relief of seeing Karen finally held accountable, but also the remnants of the trauma she had endured. The image of her locked in that cage, her small body curled up against the bars, was a scar that would take time to fade. We made our way home in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. When we finally arrived, I set down the bags we had brought in from the car, turned to Emma, and sat her down gently on the couch. My heart ached as I looked at her, knowing she had been through something no child should ever have to endure. But I also knew that this was not just about what Karen had done, it was about how we as a family would move forward from it. Emma, I said softly, my voice trembling slightly, I want you to know that I will always fight for you. I will always protect you, no matter what. What happened wasn't your fault. You didn't deserve any of it, and you will never have to face anything like that again. We're going to heal from this together. She didn't respond at first, but as I continued speaking, I saw the tears welling up in her eyes. Her lip quivered, and then she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Daddy, I was scared. I don't want to be locked up again. The pain in her voice broke me. I could feel my own tears welling up, but I held them back, choosing instead to gather her into my arms and reassure her that everything was going to be okay. But I knew that the path ahead would be anything but simple. The emotional scars left by this experience would take time to heal, and I would be there every step of the way to help her navigate them. The legal struggles, the path to accountability, while the emotional recovery was a priority, there was also the matter of holding Karen legally accountable for her actions. After the HOA meeting, I knew that Karen's removal from the board was just the first step. The reality was that locking Emma in a cage was not just an emotional violation, it was a legal one. I couldn't let this go without seeking justice through the proper channels. I contacted a lawyer the very next day, determined to ensure that Karen faced the consequences of her actions. The legal process was slow and tedious, but I was resolute. Every day that passed, I thought about Emma and the trauma she had endured. I couldn't let this kind of abuse go unchecked. The lawyer explained that while Karen's actions might not have been categorized as a criminal offense, they still constituted abuse and neglect. With the evidence I had gathered, photographs, testimonies, and the accounts from neighbors who had witnessed the event, there was a case to be made. But it would take time, and the legal process was not without its challenges. Karen, of course, had her own legal team, and they fought back with all the resources they had. They tried to discredit the evidence, questioning the credibility of the witnesses and painting the entire situation as an overreaction. They argued that Karen had merely been trying to teach discipline and that her actions were in the best interest of Emma's well-being. But despite their best efforts, I knew that the truth would prevail. The court dates were scheduled, and soon we would be standing before a judge, seeking justice not just for Emma, but for all the children who could be affected by Karen's warped sense of authority. The process was grueling. I spent sleepless nights preparing for each hearing, gathering more evidence, and speaking with other witnesses who had seen Karen's behavior firsthand. The emotional toll of it all weighed heavily on me. But I could not afford to stop. I could not let Karen's actions go unpunished. For Emma's sake, and for my own, I had to see this through. The neighborhood, shifting allegiances while the legal process unfolded, life in the neighborhood began to change. The events surrounding Karen's actions had divided the community, but as time went on, it became clear that things would never be the same. Some of Karen's former supporters quietly distanced themselves from her, unable to justify her actions in light of the evidence. Others, however, dug in their heels, continuing to defend her, arguing that what had happened was blown out of proportion and that she was being unfairly vilified. The community, once unified by its collective desire to maintain order and peace, now found itself at a crossroads. There were moments when I felt the weight of this division, when I realized that the fight for Emma's well-being had cost us more than just time and energy. It had cost us the illusion of a safe, supportive community. The silence of those who had refused to intervene, the apathy of those who had chosen to stay out of the conflict, left a bitter taste in my mouth. But I knew that we couldn't let the divisiveness consume us. The support I had received from those who stood by us, Mrs. Thompson, Mark, and a few others, became a lifeline during this time. We began to form a small but determined group of neighbors who understood the importance of standing up for what was right. We worked together not just to support each other, but to rebuild the sense of community that had been shattered. It was a slow process, but it was happening. And with each passing day, we found ourselves becoming more united in our resolve. Emma's healing, finding peace amidst the storm despite the legal struggles and the ongoing tension in the neighborhood, there was a quiet strength emerging in Emma. Slowly, she began to open up again, rediscovering the joy she had once taken in the simple things. We spent hours together, talking, drawing, and doing the things that she loved. She had always been an imaginative child, and her creativity became a source of solace for her during this difficult time. One evening, as we sat together, Emma turned to me and asked, "Daddy, will I ever be able to go back to school without being scared?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never imagined how deeply this incident would affect Emma's sense of safety. But in that moment, I knew that we had come a long way from the day Karen had locked her in the cage. Emma's fears were still there, but they were slowly being replaced by a renewed sense of hope. "We're going to make sure you feel safe, Emma," I replied, my voice steady but filled with conviction. "You're not alone in this, and no one will ever hurt you like that again. We'll take it one step at a time and you'll be okay." And slowly, she began to believe me. The scars of the past would remain, but they would not define her. Together, we would find a way to move forward. Looking ahead, The road to justice as the weeks turned into months, the legal proceedings continued, and the neighborhood slowly began to heal. Karen's actions were never truly forgotten, but the community was coming together in unexpected ways, forging stronger bonds than before. It wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past would take time to heal, but we were no longer bound by the silence that had allowed this abuse to continue unchecked. In the end, the legal battle would conclude with Karen facing serious repercussions for her actions, and while justice for Emma would never fully erase the trauma, it was a step toward creating a safer, more compassionate world for all children. But the most important lesson I had learned was that the fight for justice didn't end with a courtroom. It was an ongoing battle to ensure that no child, no parent, ever had to face what we had faced again. As for Emma, she was finding her way back to the person she had always been: strong, resilient, and full of hope. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: we were no longer fighting alone. We had each other, and that was enough. The months that followed the legal battle were quieter, yet no less significant. The loud clamor of public debate had settled, and the echoes of the community's division began to fade. But the emotional impact of what had happened, the trauma Emma had suffered, the battle for justice, the shifting allegiances in the neighborhood, remained etched in our lives. The fight had left a lasting mark on us, but it had also changed us in ways I never imagined possible. As the legal case came to a close, Karen faced serious consequences for her actions. She had been stripped of her position in the HOA and was held accountable for the abuse she had inflicted upon Emma. The court had recognized the severity of her behavior, and while the penalties were not as severe as I had hoped, they were enough to send a message that such actions could not be tolerated. Karen's influence in the community had been shattered, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the scales of justice had been balanced, if only slightly. Emma's healing, a journey toward restoration for Emma, the process of healing was a slow one. The cage, the isolation, and the cruelty of it all had left invisible scars, ones that were not so easily erased by the passage of time. I watched her struggle with nightmares and moments of fear that would often come and go, her once vibrant spirit sometimes clouded by the memory of what had happened. But over time, she began to find ways to reclaim her joy. We spent countless hours together, re-engaging in the activities she loved, like painting and reading, and I watched as her confidence began to slowly return. The playground, once a place of joy and freedom, had become a source of anxiety for Emma, but gradually she started to feel safe there again, running and laughing with the other children. It was in these small moments, when Emma smiled again or when she wanted to share a new drawing, that I saw the resilience I had always known was there. The journey wasn't without its setbacks. There were still moments when she would freeze, her eyes wide with fear, when the world around her seemed too overwhelming. But we had a routine now, one grounded in stability and safety. Emma knew that no matter what, I would be there to protect her. And slowly, as time passed, she started to believe it. I sought professional help for both of us. Therapy became a regular part of our lives. Emma began to open up about her feelings, and I learned more about how I could support her through her trauma. The weight of her experiences wasn't something I could simply take away, but I could help her carry it. And together, we found a way to move forward. The neighborhood, building bridges. The events surrounding Karen's actions had fractured the neighborhood, but it also gave birth to a new kind of solidarity. The battle for justice had forced many of us to reconsider what it meant to be a community. The neighborhood I had once thought of as a place of harmony had shown me its flaws, its silence in the face of cruelty, its complacency in allowing power to go unchecked. But the events that followed had also shown me that change was possible, even in the most divided of places. Some of the neighbors who had stood by Karen, either out of fear or loyalty, began to rethink their positions. It wasn't an immediate transformation, but conversations were happening. People who had once been afraid to challenge Karen's authority were now speaking up, and the community began to unite around shared values of compassion and respect for one another. The once stronghold of Karen's influence was now a place where new leaders were emerging, neighbors who genuinely cared about the well-being of others, who didn't feel the need to enforce rigid rules at the expense of kindness. While not everyone had come to support me, there was a growing sense of awareness about the need for accountability and empathy in our community. I still remember Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had been one of the first to stand by my side. After everything had settled, she invited Emma and me over for tea. We talked about the past, but we also talked about the future. Mrs. Thompson had been a voice of reason in the chaos, and her wisdom became a foundation for rebuilding the trust that had been lost. I never thought I'd see the day when someone would stand up to Karen, Mrs. Thompson said, a smile tugging at her lips. But you did, and you showed us all something important. You showed us what it means to protect the vulnerable even when it's hard. Her words stuck with me as I knew that our fight had been bigger than just one person. It had been about changing the culture of silence and complacency that had allowed such things to happen in the first place. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood was beginning to rebuild, brick by brick, not out of obligation, but out of a newfound understanding of what it meant to care for one another. Justice, but not enough. As the legal battles concluded, I reflected on the notion of justice. In a perfect world, the consequences for Karen's actions would have been harsher, her punishment fitting the severity of the crime. But in the real world, justice rarely unfolds in ways we expect. Even as Karen was held accountable in the legal sense, there was still a part of me that felt unsatisfied. The pain that Emma had experienced, the fear, the isolation, could not be erased by any ruling, no matter how severe the penalties. But as I sat with Emma one evening, watching her draw and laughing as she shared the latest piece of her artwork, I realized that justice wasn't just about what happened in the courtroom. It was about the journey we had taken, about how we had risen above the darkness that Karen had tried to impose on us. The victory was in Emma's healing, in the courage she had shown in the face of unimaginable adversity. And it was in the transformation of our community, the gradual movement toward something better, something more compassionate. Justice, I had come to understand, was not a final destination. It was a process, a commitment to standing up for what is right, even when it's difficult, even when it feels like the world is against you. It was about the courage to protect the vulnerable, the strength to challenge the status quo, and the determination to fight for the dignity of every human being. Looking ahead, a new beginning, the road ahead for Emma and me is not without its challenges. There will be days when the scars of the past resurface, when the memory of what happened threatens to overshadow the present. But I now know that we are stronger than the darkness that tried to break us. We have faced the unimaginable, and together, we have come out on the other side. As Emma grows, I will continue to fight for her as every parent should for their child. And in doing so, I will continue to fight for a world where children are never treated as less than, where they are loved and respected for who they are, not defined by their disabilities. The story of Emma and me, of Karen and the neighborhood, is just one example of a battle that could have gone unnoticed, one small family's struggle against a system of power that sought to crush them. But the lesson is clear: the fight for justice doesn't end with a single victory. It continues every day in the choices we make and in the courage we find to stand up for what is right. And for Emma, for my daughter, I will keep fighting, because she deserves a world where she is seen, where she is heard, and where she is never, ever locked in a cage again. This is not the end. It is only the beginning. As we reach the end of Emma's journey through this unimaginable ordeal, I want to take a moment to reflect on everything we've been through and the lessons that have emerged from this story. What began as a simple, tragic incident of cruelty, an act so shocking and heart-wrenching, has turned into a powerful reminder of what it means to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, and what happens when a community chooses silence over action. This story is about more than just one family's struggle. It's about all of us. It's about the way we allow power to be wielded over the vulnerable, the way we sit back and watch injustice unfold, because we're too afraid to speak up, too comfortable to make a stand. But it's also about hope. It's about the courage of one parent to fight for their child, the resilience of a daughter to survive, and the transformation of a divided community coming together in the name of justice. And that's where you come in. What will you do? I want to ask you, the viewer, what you would do if you found yourself in a situation like mine. What would you do if your child was targeted in such a brutal, unjust way? Would you remain silent, or would you rise up and fight for what's right? It's easy to imagine what we would do when we're watching a story unfold, but it's much harder when we're faced with that kind of reality. The world isn't always fair. As we've seen in this story, there are people who will use their position of power to hurt others, to control, and to manipulate. The truth is, the fight for justice isn't always straightforward. It's not a battle that can be won in one moment, one courtroom, or one decision. It's a lifelong struggle. It's a daily commitment to ensuring that we never let the darkness win, that we continue to rise to speak out and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Now, I want to know, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you have the courage to take action, to stand up and challenge the system, even when it feels like the world is against you? I invite you to think about this question, not just for me, but for yourself. This isn't just about Emma or me. This is about the future we want to build. This is about what kind of world we want to leave behind for the next generation. Join the fight. Share your voice if you've been moved by this story. I urge you to share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Share your experiences, your insights, your own stories of struggle and triumph. Let's create a space where we can come together to support each other, to stand up for justice, and to remind each other that we are not alone in this fight. Your voice matters, and it can be a part of something bigger. When we keep these stories silent, when we hide from the uncomfortable truths, nothing changes. But when we share our voices, when we speak out against injustice, we empower others to do the same. So, don't let this story stop here. Share your thoughts, engage in this conversation, and let's build a community that stands for empathy, compassion, and accountability. Support the channel. Spread awareness. I also ask that you consider subscribing to this channel if you haven't already. Every subscriber helps amplify these stories, bringing awareness to important issues that need to be discussed. By subscribing, you become part of this larger movement, one that values truth, justice, and the importance of protecting those who are vulnerable. Like this video if it has resonated with you. Your like tells me that you stand with us, that you believe in the power of storytelling to inspire change. And don't forget to share this video with others. Whether it's a friend, a family member, or a colleague, spreading this message is vital. The more people who see this story, the more we can ignite the conversations that matter. Whether you're sharing it on social media, through text, or just telling someone about it, sharing is the key to getting this message out there. There are many people who have no idea what happens when power goes unchecked, when a community turns a blind eye. It's not just about Karen or Emma. This is about all the Karens out there and all the people who are suffering in silence. By sharing this story, we can ensure that more people understand the importance of standing up, speaking out, and making their voices heard. Empathy, community, and the future of this story isn't just about one event. It's about how we, as individuals and as a society, respond to the injustice we see. How do we react when we witness cruelty? Do we look away because it's too difficult? Or do we rise up and say, this isn't right, and I'm not going to stand for it? Empathy is the key. The ability to see another person's pain and respond with compassion is what makes us human. Emma's story is one of pain, yes, but it is also a story of hope. A story of a family who fought together to protect what was most precious. And now, it's your turn to fight alongside us, to stand for what's right, to be part of a movement that says, no more cruelty, no more silence. But this isn't just a fight for justice in one neighborhood. It's a fight for justice in every corner of the world. We all have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable, to ensure that the system isn't being manipulated for the benefit of the few at the expense of the many. We can't turn a blind eye anymore. We must all be willing to take a stand, whether it's in our own homes, in our neighborhoods, or in the public sphere. This is why we need you. This is why your voice matters. Together, we can build a world where justice isn't an afterthought. It's a given, A world where every child, every person, every community is treated with dignity and respect. Let's make a difference together, so I leave you with this. If you're watching this, you're already a part of something bigger. You've taken the first step toward understanding, toward empathy, and toward change. But the journey doesn't end here. I invite you to be a part of it, to subscribe, to share, to speak out. Let's make this fight for justice bigger than one family. Let's make it a movement, a collective voice that can no longer be ignored. There's power in numbers. Together, we can hold those in power accountable. Together, we can make sure that no one ever has to experience what Emma went through. Together, we can create a world where compassion, understanding, and justice are the norms, not the exceptions. The fight for justice, the fight for a better world, is never easy, but it's worth it. It's worth every tear, every moment of doubt, every ounce of energy, and it starts with you. So join us. Join this movement. Together, we will rise. Together, we will make sure that stories like Emma's are heard, acknowledged, and never repeated again. Let's make a difference. Let's change the world, one voice at a time.